Rough and almost unwelcoming, the light limestone peaks of the Gesäuse National Park tower into the sky. Mysterious and breathtakingly beautiful, Austria's newest national park has opened its doors. Even before we enter the Gesäuse Park, the idyllic town of Admont warrants a visit. The main street of well-kept townhouses leads through one of the oldest settlements in Styria, with the Halamara mountain chain as a backdrop. The Leopoldine fountain, built in the year 1892, spouts out water. And the town hall is Venetian in its appearance. Even more famous, however, is Admont Abbey, a Benedictine monastery. This is the oldest cloister. Its origins date back to the foundation of the monastery of St. Hema of Gurk. After the death of her husband, Wilhelm II, she was one of the richest women of her time. In 1074, Archbishop Gebhard of Salzburg was given the financial means with which to build the monastery. The first monks came from the Benedictine Abbey of St. Peter in Salzburg. The impressive interior is divided into a 3-level nave with 5 side chapels and 6 altars. The high altar, in white Carrara marble, is decorated with a statue of St. Blasius, and above is a Gothic crucifix. Long corridors lead to various rooms where, unique in Austria, a permanent exhibition of Gothic art from the Middle Ages is on display. "85 masterpieces of the late Gothic period, such as carved Madonnas, give an overview of an epoch that is one of the most interesting in the culture and tradition of the history of art. The expressive faces and numerous gestures unite together in harmonious form. The world-famous library of Admont Abbey is located in the east wing of the monastery. In the past, the ceremonial hall has been called the 8th wonder of the world. An unparalleled place, 70 meters long, 14 meters wide, and 11 meters high. The largest monastic library in the world. Admont Abbey is a spiritual and cultural center. For more than 6 centuries, worshippers have been making pilgrimages to the pilgrimage church Frauenberg, which was built by an abbot from Admont on the nearby mountain peak. After the turmoil of the Reformation, the pilgrimage flourished again in the Baroque era. So, the church was extensively redesigned. Carlo Antonio gathered renowned architects, as well as stuccoers, painters, and sculptors. They created an artwork which became known as the Pearl of the Enns Valley, a union of faith, art, and culture. The abundant stucco of the barrel vaults is by Giovanni Battista Carlone. And Antonio Maderni created frescoes depicting the Virgin Mary's life. The park's name, Gesäuse, comes from the constant roaring sound of the nearby Enns River, the country's longest inland river at 254 kilometers. In the Gesäuse, the Enns breaks through the northern limestone Alps, through a hidden valley between Admont and Haiflau. There, the character of the river landscape changes abruptly from the broad valley floor in the Admont basin through the entrance to the Gesäuse into a narrow valley. Here, the riverbed narrows from 100 to under 30 meters and shows its wilder side. The Enns River makes its way through this wild Styrian valley, between steeply sloping rock walls that reach to the riverbanks. The mountains look as if they're going to enclose everything below in a fist and shield it away from the outside world. Steep limestone mountains, well known and popular with rock climbers, provide walls for athletes of all levels. More and more tributaries emerge from the rock walls, sometimes wide and sometimes narrow. Like the Johnsbach, which slowly gathers and flows in the direction of the mountain village of the same name. The rocks of the Kalk Alps originated in the tropical prehistoric ocean of the Triassic period, 200 to 250 million years ago. When Africa began to shift itself into its present position in the Jurassic period, things became pretty cramped in the Mediterranean. The Alps began to pile up, and the layers in the prehistoric sea came to the Earth's surface. Johnsdorf seems almost fake and old-fashioned, with its rural village community, honest hospitality and unspoilt nature. But as beautiful as the landscape and mountains are, they are also so dangerous. The mountaineering graveyard in Johnsbach, where the inscriptions of the graves refer to various tragedies, bear witness to this. Mountain rescue teams have to be called out about 60 times a year, as, year on year, more hikers and mountaineers are attracted to the Gesäuse. The largest mountaineering graveyard in the world is not only home to deceased alpinists, but also locals who were fatally injured whilst working as woodcutters, chamois drivers, or sheep farmers in the mountains. The small cemetery church stands alone near the edge of the forest, humble both outside and in, but well cared for, a place of deep faith. The small altar gleams with gold-coloured paint and is decorated with angels and cherubs, and there is also an organ. This site is rightfully protected as a historic monument. Today, lush forests partly cover the lower slopes of the mountain, as water seeps into the limestone above and back out below. The Gesäuse Park is a paradise for nature lovers. Hikes offer amazing views of mountain peaks, such as the Großer Oddstein. And pastures are farmed in summer, like the Mudlinger Hütte, with its healthy dairy cows. Alpine huts like this one are a common destination for mountain climbers. Healthy mountain air and fragrant herb meadows also make the milk taste better. Here, everything is a natural wonder. Humans and animals have found a common refuge, which is certainly something worth protecting. Founded in 2002, the Gesäuse is the youngest and third largest of the 6 Austrian national parks. It is characterized by its abundance of water and a high number of endemic animals and plants, forms of life that only exist in a very limited geographical area. The predominant rock here is the Wetterstein dolomite, which originated as limestone in the prehistoric sea and, for the most part, was later converted into dolomite. In the late Triassic period, Dachstein dolomite followed, layered with Dachstein limestone, from which the steep cliffs on the high mountains are made. Wisps of fog, dark canyons and forests and wild craggy rocks. In the Johnsbach Valley, there are copper deposits that were mined from as early as 15 BC. In the late Middle Ages, this became a popular area for logging. Most of the forests belonging to the Benedictine monastery, Admont. When it rains, everything changes. The streams and the Enns swell, and the flood turns even the lovely Johnsbach into a raging beast. Water flows in all directions, and driftwood collects around the pillars supporting the bridge over the Enns, transported here from all around by the floods. The Enns cataract shows the primal force of water. where in fair weather experienced water sports athletes brave the white waters, this is now no longer possible. Even the small power station Heiflau opens all the locks as the power of the floods are too violent. But after the rain, nature always awakens in all its splendor. Specially protected plant species and endemites inhabit this natural jewel in Upper Styria, Austria. The mining town Heiflau is located at the edge of the Gesäuse. The war memorial and freestanding sculpture of Maria Immaculata indicate the deep faith of the people here. The town hall is today still decorated with mine motifs. And a few generations of the villagers spent their youth in the listed building of the elementary school. Along the route to the elevated parish church, an old cross points the way. The church tower has an onion-shaped dome, and there is a small graveyard next to the church. Inside, the nave has been kept simple, so the pulpit and the high altar stand out all the more in their simple yet artistic splendor. They were built around 1730 in an older version of the church. The organ followed later. The bridge at the confluence of the rivers Enns and Johnsbach is also protected. Slightly higher up, you can see the remains of the old wooden rakes of Heiflau that protected the old bridge from driftwood in high waters. The Eisenwurzen Nature Park begins in the small town of Mooslandl, which is characterized by its beautiful forests, romantic river valleys, and idyllic farms. The Radstadthof is a listed farmhouse. It seems that Renaissance-style sgraffito was installed here in 1594, yet the existence of the farm was first recorded in 1135. A Baroque sun and moon dial completes this magnificent monument of rural culture. Here too, a romantically placed cross serves as a guide for hikers. The hike begins at Gams and leads through the Wasserloch Gorge along the Gamsbach Creek. Wooden bridges lead above the creek along the cliff walls. Now, hardly any light shines through the leafy roof of the narrow gorge, yet the path still leads further up the creek. The gorge gets steadily taller, and the water flow is increasingly hampered by boulders and looks wilder and wilder. The deeper into the gorge we go, the more the wooden walkways constantly switch sides and lead uphill with the flowing water. The gorge gets increasingly narrower, and there's hardly any room left for the water and the wooden walkway. Once again, the Gamsbach shows its force, which grows to a dangerous degree when it rains, so that it cannot always be contained in the gorge. Palfau is situated in the lower Salza valley, which is cut into a deep gorge until it reaches the mouth of the Enns. The listed parish church Allerheiligen from the year 1735 has a small graveyard. The decorative sculptures, as well as the statues of Antonius von Padua and Johann Nepomuk, are by Josef Stammel. In 1706, the noble family Traut-Mansdorf had a small chapel built that Abbot Anselm later rebuilt into a hermitage. And finally, the organ from 1779, which was extended in 1902. Palfau was first documented in 1280, but its more recent historical significance is particularly due to it being situated on the Eisenstrasse. The elementary office and municipal office have been spruced up, and the tavern and a inn and an old house hark back to the former significance of the town as a customs and toll station. People here found work in the production of forged iron from the ore from the nearby mountains, both as a basic material and as consumer goods manufactured from it. Palfau also has a natural attraction, the Wasserloch Gorge. At first, we cross a suspension bridge over the Salza, with the whitewater athletes below. Next, the climb to the gorge along new wooden platforms begins, and soon the first waterfall appears. Step by step, the solid wooden staircases spiral upwards, and the mountains above them seem to await visitors. The next waterfall appears. This one looks completely different. Clear water falls elegantly down a 28-meter drop. Further up, the so-called Schleierfall waterfall appears. Here, the white water falls up to 67 meters down the cliff face below. The next waterfall above also has a drop of 37 meters, only narrower and thus not as impressive as the Schleierfall. The descending water separates as it falls, but after crashing down, gathers together again before the next drop. Now, just a short steep path through the forest until the first clear view of the waterhole in the mountain from where the water surges out. Just a few steps higher is a viewing platform, built in 2008. This last climb is worth the effort, as the view is magnificent. Down below is the Sulzer Valley, between wooded mountains, with the Hocker in the background. The municipality Wildalpen lies on both sides of the Sulzer, below the Hochschwab Massif and the Lassing Alps. It was first populated by the Admont Abbey, founded in 1072, and gained prosperity through the iron industry. The village graveyard was built to be relatively large, as at the height of iron ore production, many people lived and were buried here. The local Baroque church of St. Barbara is one of the most important church buildings of the 18th century. The interior is decorated to an above-average artistic standard. Craftspeople from the area created carpentry work, paintings and gildings. The high altar with the statue of Pieter von Wildalpen from 1669 has made the church a pilgrimage destination for worshippers from near and far. At first glance, it is surprising to see the Viennese coat of arms and the inscription Second Vienna Mountain Spring Pipeline on a building. But this had become the second drinking water supply source for Vienna from as early as 1910. In the middle of the protected drinking water area is the Brunsee Lake. The water reflects dreamily, but is not for swimming in, as the drinking water is destined for Vienna. The valley ends here at the Brunnmauern. An untouched landscape conservation area with a lot of rare flora. Here, nature has been allowed to grow undisturbed and protected due to the drinking water requirements of a large city. And treks in the peaceful area below the Predigtstuhl Peak are a really unique experience. The limestone peaks tower high above, making this a paradise for nature lovers. The Wildalpen White Water Centre also attracts a lot of visitors, lovers of whitewater sports. Here they can ride kayaks, canoes and rubber dinghies to their heart's content. They can then camp or spend the night in a caravan right by the shore, surrounded by fragrant mountain meadows. Grossreifling, with its church and the so-called old and new boxes, sits at a bend in the Enns, near the confluence of the Seltzer. From 1500 on, the town developed out of a settlement of iron huts, and its inhabitants lived well for a long time from iron production. The parish church St. Nicolaus, built in 1507, is attached to the old box and stands out with its tower and onion-shaped dome. Next door, a grain store has been converted into the Forest Museum Sylvanum. This museum is all about wood, how it was transported in winter and summer by sled, lorry or raft. What the woodcutters' lives were like, who often had to spend months in the woods doing hard labour. The tree felling and woodworking tools are on display. Right up to today's state-of-the-art machines that cut wood or have revolutionized tree surveying. Products made of wood, such as the wooden rakes in the rivers, are exhibited here, or rams for driving in wooden posts for the ox train. Just below the church on the hill is a well-preserved old farm building, where the now historically protected coal scales were once housed. Coal was brought here to be weighed for resale. The solid building was also a storage space. At Altenmarkt by St. Gallen, everything has revolved around iron production and processing since the 16th century. The town was destroyed in a fire in 1575 and 1773, and it was looted by French troops after 1800. However, Altenmarkt has survived it all and has been rebuilt over and over again by its diligent residents. Even more beautiful and a better place to live each time. The parish church was built out of a wooden chapel in 1152, but was also destroyed in fires, yet was always rebuilt again. As the area became rich through iron ore, it is only right that their church sparkles accordingly, with a marble pulpit and several altars. Oversized angels seem to protect people visiting the church from all around. At the gates of the town, a power station was built on the River Enns in 1960, which generates 150 gigawatts of hydroelectric power per hour and is environmentally friendly. The town of St. Gallen is not far away in the St. Gallen Basin and was first documented in 1487 as Gewerke. The Gewerken house was later turned into the Gasthof zur Post. Nowadays, the St. John of Nepomuk looks protectively over the long main square. And the historically protected fountain in front of the colourful houses is crowned with bears made from stone and decorated with lion heads sprinkling out water. You can still visit the blacksmith's house, which used to be busy when the horse cart ruled the road. The graveyard by the parish church is just as small as the town itself, but is well maintained and the graves are always decorated with flowers. In 1150, a first church was built here in honour of St. Gallus. It wasn't until 1523 that the new Gothic new building was built. Between 1736 and 1740, the church was finally extended in Baroque style, led by the architect Jacob Prantauer. In the centre of the late Baroque high altar is the image of the Ascension of Mary. The famous painter Martin Johann Schmidt also had a role to play here. In the art world, he is known as Kremser Schmidt. Just outside St. Gallen, at a tributary of the Enns, is the so-called Pfeiffer Hammer House, a former manor where hammers were produced, that today has been converted into a residential house. The owners of the hammer works needed to have the rights not only to use the water, but also the forests for charcoal, as well as to agriculture to provide for their workers. On the hill behind St. Gallen Tower stand the now renovated ruins of the castle Burg Gallenstein, surrounded by blooming flower meadows and healthy woodland, through which a path leads to the castle. In 1278, The fortress was first documented as the centre of the lands held by the Gallenstein family. By the end of the 19th century, it had become a refuge and administrative centre for Admont Abbey. The complex is overlooked by a large residential tower, which is connected to the other two towers by defensive walkways and outer walls. The view over St. Gallen and the Enns Valley is astounding. This is how enemies could be spotted from afar in order to warn the local people. This was certainly also a reason that the castle was never conquered in combat. It was not until 1950 that the Styrian Castle Association began to turn the castle ruins into a popular destination for tourists. Above St. Gallen, on the way to the Spitzenbach, is a sacred gem, the church, the Wieskirche. The Spitzenbach was chosen as a protected natural area in Styria in 1971. The small wild brook finds its romantic but also adventurous way down the narrow gorge. The gorge is also called the Valley of the Butterflies, as up to 450 species of butterfly live here at certain times of the year. The higher up you go, the steeper and steeper the rock faces become, and the young brook gets narrower. With a bit of luck, in this almost hidden solitude, you can find a rare plant that is kept secret from tourists, the yellow lady's slipper. At the top of the gorge, the view opens onto the mountain slopes and mountain peaks of the Gesäuse. The landscape is exceptional, with magical places full of adventure and enchanting beauty. A paradise for nature lovers and thrill seekers alike.